This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
This is Sarah, and I just want to take a moment to speak to you about this week's sponsor, Favor. Favor, Inc. is a statewide family-led nonprofit 501c3 organization that is committed to empowering families as advocates and partners in improving educational and health outcomes for our children. Favor is the Connecticut state organization of the Federation of Families for Children's Mental Health. Favor offers a single place for families with children who have medical, mental, emotional, and behavioral health challenges to find information, assistance, and training. To find out more about Favor, please go to favor-ct.org. We are grateful for our opportunity to work with Favor as a sponsor, and now on to the rest of the episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Caregiver Chronicles. My name is Sarah, and today I have the privilege of introducing you to MaryAnne Sterling. MaryAnne has been an Alzheimer's advocate for over 25 years. She was a caregiver for her parents with dementia. She speaks at healthcare conferences and with policymakers to bring awareness to family caregivers' unmet needs. She is the host of the Whole Care Network podcast, Us versus Them, Patients and Caregivers Confront Healthcare. Hello, MaryAnne. How are you today?
Hey, Sarah. I'm great. It's so nice to be with you. We have so much to talk about.
Yes, we do. Thank you so much for being here. Would you like to further introduce yourself to my audience?
Well, you gave a very kind introduction, and I'll just say I have spent a whole lot of years advocating for others, and predominantly in the Alzheimer's and dementia space and the caregiving spaces, as you mentioned. But I've also taken up the cause of women's health, something near and dear to my heart, and something that we're going to talk extensively about today, and I'm so glad. It's long overdue.
Yes. Thank you so much. And I'm so excited to explore this topic with you. But before we get into that, you've done like important, incredible things in your life and amazing things. You really are an inspiration to me just talking to you. But I want you to start out by talking about your role as a family caregiver and talk about that journey a little bit.
Yeah, so in fact, I really became a caregiver when I look back in time at the age of 7. My mom had a radical mastectomy. For those who may not be familiar with that term, she had breast cancer. She was 44 years old at the time. I was 7. And in those days, back in the early 1970s, they did a very brutal surgery for women who had breast cancer. And from that point on, I helped her do things like she had a compression sleeve on her right arm that I had to help her get on and off. I had to help her with her physical therapy exercises as she was recovering from that surgery. Fast forward, and as I got a little bit older, my dad started showing first signs of dementia. I was about 13 when I realized that something was wrong, right? And that turned into a multi-decade journey with my dad, who passed in 2001. And then I had to immediately turn my attention to my mom in 2001, who at that point had been a full-time caregiver for 14 years for my father. She needed me to be her caregiver at that point. She had increasing health challenges. Most of them reared their ugly heads because of the stress of caregiving for my dad. And so I go from a dad with dementia to a mother with multiple chronic conditions, then dementia herself. And before that journey came to conclusion in 2016, my husband and I had a second parent with Alzheimer's disease, my father-in-law, who was diagnosed in 2013. So essentially, we had two parents with dementia overlapping at the same time. And our journey over the years, became, I knew early on that I couldn't do this myself. I could not do this myself. I was an only child. And I started telling my story. I started becoming an advocate. I didn't even know what that was, Sarah. But in 1997, into 1998, I actually told our family story for the first time in Richmond, at the State House in Richmond, Virginia, where we lived, and then on Capitol Hill, thanks to a dear friend of mine at the Alzheimer's Association, who at the time, who encouraged me to talk about our family story. At that time, I was 31 years old. My parents lived in my home. They had to move in with me because their financial situation, their physical health, my dad's dementia was just untenable. So I'm a 30-year-old looking at my peers, right, who they're getting married, having kids, going to graduate school. And I have two parents with dementia and other chronic conditions living in my home. Telling that story for the first time was powerful. And over the years, it kind of progressed from sort of the political policy advocacy to advocating on behalf of other caregivers like myself, other adult daughters, to, okay, wait a minute, but caregivers don't have technology. Everyone else does, but caregivers don't. And it just kept evolving. I spent years literally serving on committees, boards, working groups at organizations that were really on the front lines of trying to improve the life for Alzheimer's families, for caregivers like me. And that's a little bit about my journey in caregiving. It is long, it has spanned multiple decades, but I also realize that, I'm not alone. There are, a million other adult daughters, if not more, in this country who are facing the same thing right now. And those are the folks that, I still support in my advocacy efforts every day.
Yeah. And I think, I think that it's amazing that you became a caregiver so young. I couldn't imagine caring for my mom at 7. And it sounds like your parents were probably a little bit older than my parents were when they had me and things like that. But yeah, I mean, so you've been caregiving your whole life, basically. And that's just so admirable. I say that I'm a lifelong caregiver, starting at 17 as a nurse's aide and helping take care of my grandfather, and then my kids, and then my grandmother. And I'll be taking care of my kids forever. But like, it's, I wasn't so young. So I really just want to applaud you for that, because that's just incredible. And also, you talked about how you weren't the only person going through this, and you knew that you weren't. You knew that there were millions of others going through it. And that's why the world needs you and people like you to advocate and to go on these committees and to support not just the person who needs care, but their caregivers also, because the caregivers kind of get left in the dust. And you're 1,000% right on that. Like, they get left in the dust. There's all this policy, legislation, and support for the people with the diagnosis. And this can go for any diagnosis, but what support are we giving the person who has to give up their career, their hopes, their dreams, or whatever else to care for that person?
It's such a good point. And I'm not alone in this. I know I gave up Basically everything. My caregiving situation, while I had both of my parents alive, and my dad, who he actually had vascular dementia. That situation cost me my first marriage. When my parents moved in with me, believe it or not, I had just started graduate school and I had to drop out because I could not go to school and manage my caregiving situation at the same time and work full time, by the way. So I want to emphasize over the years that our situation, it was evergreening, it was ever evolving, right? Sometimes we had people to care for in our home. Other times I had a parent, in the hospital, in a nursing home, in a different setting, right? So I think what policymakers and maybe a large segment of our society don't understand, these situations are never static, right? They're ever changing, evergreening. There is more information that you as a caregiver have to assimilate, and you have to block and tackle and shift. And it is the hardest job in the world. It really is. My concern is what it's costing other adult daughters and sons who are doing this. That you're a caregiver because you're a good person, you're a good human being, right? But ultimately, the cost, not just to the individual, but to society, is really huge, right? You can imagine, maybe there's a caregiver out there who had to drop out of school like I did. Well, maybe that person, down the line would have discovered a cure for cancer or some other chronic disease that we're desperate to find treatments and cures for. So it's the lost sort of potential of the people who are leaving the workplace. I did that as well for a time, leaving their educational aspirations, doing that for all the right reasons, but it is a huge cost to our society as well. And I really think that needs more discussion, as well as the fact that this is still primarily, not all the time, primarily a women's issue. And I like to remind people of that. I say that with the caveat that my husband has been an amazing caregiver over the years, both for his father and his brother, who both passed in 2019. There's that aspect, which is important as well. But the impact to women is so great in our society. I think we need to spend more time and energy in that space.
Yeah. And I 100% agree with you on it being a primarily women's issue, but I do want to acknowledge the men who step up, because there are some amazing men out there who take on the caregiver role. My husband is very active in Joey's care. He helped me with my grandmother, as far as he would not like toilet her or anything like that. However, he would be involved in his care in ways that he felt comfortable with, just having her hang out with him while I was at work and my parents were away, so she was safe. My father was involved in my grandmother's care too, as well as, he prepared meals for my mom and him, because my dad's the chef in the family. He would make sure he got my grandmother a carrot cake every week and made her favorite French onion soup. So like, even if a male isn't the primary caregiver, they can still help. Even, you know what I mean? They can still help support women in that way, and their spouses in that way, which is just, amazing. And again, when something happens with me and I'm sick, Jeremy has the brunt of taking care of me and the kids. And he does it, and he does amazing. But and there's also other male family caregivers out there. There's so many. I can think of 3 right off the top of my head I was on a retreat for family caregivers, and there was one man in the group who was a caregiver for a spouse. And there's Bill Cohen is another one that I can think of, who talks about caregiving being primarily a women's issue, even though he's a man who was there taking care of his mother. He knows mostly this affects women. And if you're a man and you're in that caregiving space, you're a very brave man, I think, still. And I do just want to shout out to them. But yes, I 100% agree with you also that this is a mostly women's issue. And I want that to kind of, I feel like this is a really good lead in for like our main topic here. And that's gender bias in healthcare. Can you explain to us what gender bias in healthcare is?
I first became familiar with this topic, not because I learned it in school, but because I experienced it myself. And essentially, it's women are not getting appropriate care by our healthcare system much of the time because there are sort of preconceived notions about, let's take heart attack, for example. All right. We now know that women who are having a heart attack have different symptoms than men do, right? But still today, there are women who go to the emergency room having a heart attack, and it is misdiagnosed. They are dismissed. Oh, it's just indigestion. Go home. These things still happen today, and that is just the tip of the iceberg, Sarah. But it is the idea that our healthcare system has for years sort of used men as the focal point of both medical research and, sort of how a disease or condition presents itself when it's totally different for women. And the problem is that so many times we're not getting the care we need. We're being dismissed by medical professionals who aren't listening to us. That's a big part of this. We're suffering because of that unnecessarily, because we're just not getting the differential care. We're not like men. Sorry, but our bodies are made differently, and diseases and conditions present themselves differently in us. And I think part of it too is the idea that was sort of over the years has been pervasive, is that women are hysterical. There's actually a word for it, believe it or not. And that's the hysteria is why we're in pain, or we're under too much stress. That's why we're in pain. And, those sort of old wives' tales, I like to call them, unfortunately, they're still hanging in there today. And we need to talk about this. In fact, I want to put a plug in. My friend Maya Dusenberry has an amazing book that everybody should read, both women and men alike. It's called Doing Harm: The Truth About How Bad Medicine and Lazy Science Leave Women Dismissed, Misdiagnosed, and Sick. And I urge everyone to get a copy of Maya's book and understand the first 20 pages will give you sort of the background and history behind where we are and why gender bias exists today.
Well, thank you for sharing Maya's book also. But I also know that as far as gender bias goes, the healthcare system was set up by males. It was not when the system was set up in the beginnings of things, there were not female doctors. Like that was just not a thing. It was
right. They weren't in medical school either. There were no women in medical school.
Yeah, no, we weren't allowed. We could not do that. We could be nurses, but that's it. And it kind of sets it up in a way where like their prototype, their concerns, and and I'm not like anti-man again, this isn't that, but this is like the experiences that they had to base on when they were developing modern healthcare. I'm using quotation marks for those because, I'm talking when I say modern for that time being like the 1800s, the early 1900s, as the systems were developed. They were using their own bodies as in their own feelings and their own emotions. And even like to say women are hysterical and women are emotional, I strongly disagrry with that statement. Otherwise, I'm somehow a man, because I am one of the like least emotional people I know. I like I don't cry a lot. And when I do, it's something big, you know. I know men who cry more than me. And
This is why these stereotypes exist, though, right? It is a stereotype. So women, from the beginning, as you alluded to, we've been stereotyped. And unfortunately, that is impacting the healthcare that we receive today in 2023.
Yeah. And I can remember my mom having issues like menstrual issues and stuff like that, similar to what I recently went through. And her male doctor telling her, "Oh yeah, it's common, just suck it up. Every woman goes through this." And I remember getting to the point where I was having cramps shoot down past my knee and my legs and all the way up into my back and my shoulder, and being like, if I walk, I'm gonna get a leg cramp, and just needing to sit down with a heat pad and try not to pass out, like, you know, being that bad. And being told like, well, it's probably nothing, it's normal, some women, this is normal. And I'm like, thanks, like, this because this was never normal before. This has only been happening the past year. This is not what normal is for me or before. Like, you mean to tell me I turned 37 and my body just decides to fall apart? Like, no, you know, I'm not accepting that. And I had to push a little bit. And I even had a doctor, and there's even been male doctors who are like, well, we don't really want to do anything because, you know, it's not normal. Or what if you decide you want more kids? Which at that point I had two autistic kids, and it was like, that is off the table. I had when I was actually in labor with my first child, I was scheduled for a C-section. And I went into labor before the C-section was scheduled. My water had broken. And the first doctor who came in, who was on call, the obstetrician on call, was like, I'm not going to do the C-section because there's no reason to. And I'm like, I'm scheduled for one. I have a hip problem. I'm like, and there is concern that with my hip, my pelvis being tilted, that there could be a problem. And my doctor and I agreed that I was going to have a C-section. Fortunately, my doctor came in, who was a female doctor who understood my concerns. And I did have my C-section, but for, you know, a different doctor who I hadn't seen my whole pregnancy, to come in and tell me, I'm the doctor who's here now, you're having this baby the natural way. And I just tell a nurse, you need to get my doctor here. Like, I want to see my doctor. I don't want to see this guy. I don't know who this guy is. Get him out of my room. Do not bring him near me again. I was like, but like, I had to strongly advocate for myself for that. And this was 2011. My first son was born. So yeah, you know, we're still fighting. We're still fighting these gender biased I mean, it's more like you said, heart attacks present differently in women. Our bodies are different. Gallbladder issues and appendix issues can present differently in women as well. Our bodies are just not, you know, you can't use just one type of body as the standard for everybody. You have to use different body types as the medical standard for everybody. But anyway, thoughts?
Well, listen, first of all, I have to commiserate with you. I actually had an OBGYN when I told her I thought I was in menopause. She said, "Oh, honey, embrace the sweat." Well, let me tell you, I've never embraced anything. Okay, that was not okay. That line was not okay to use with me or any other woman. And, you know, it leads to, you know, the larger issue of what's going on in our medical schools and our nursing schools. I mean, apparently, from what I can tell, no one is teaching gender differences in medicine. And I hope someone out there proves me wrong and you know, and assures me that's not the case. But it's sad. I mean, my own personal experience is with a condition called frozen shoulder. And this is something that so many people are not familiar with. They've never heard of frozen shoulder before. It kind of sounds like a side of beef, right? And what this is very common in women who turn 50, and all of a sudden they're headed into or already in menopause, and that sudden drop in hormones, right, contributes to this condition called frozen shoulder. And just to be very clear what this is not oh, my shoulder's a little sore, it's not that. Frozen shoulder, for me, it was my right shoulder. And by the way, I am right hand dominant, like a lot of folks. And I lost the use of my right arm, for the most part, for 2.5 years, right? Because what happens is there are adhesions that form like glue, if you will, in your shoulder joint, and your joint locks. And it's the pain is severe. I've heard people refer to it, I'm not making this up myself, I've heard people refer to it as suicide level pain. It is excruciating. It is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There's nothing you can take that will ease the pain at all. You can take all the pain medication you want. It's not going to touch it. Okay. That's what we're talking about here. And unfortunately, our healthcare system, very few people within our healthcare system, in my experience, have any idea what this is or how to treat it or not treat it. Okay. Not treating is just as important as treating in some cases. And it took me 13 months to get a proper diagnosis. During that 13 months, I was treated for things that I did not have. I was treated for Lyme disease. I didn't have Lyme disease. I was told that I had a rotator cuff injury. Okay, it was my rotator cuff. Very common comeback for women who have frozen shoulder. Oh, you got a rotator cuff injury. Unfortunately, the MRI of my shoulder said otherwise. My rotator cuff was just fine. Okay, so then it comes down to the fact that people don't believe you're in as much pain as you say you are. Okay, that creates another level of complexity for frozen shoulder, because there's, the orthopedic community they don't see anything fractured, they don't see anything torn, they don't see anything obvious with your shoulder. So then it becomes a matter of convincing healthcare professionals that you're not making this up, that you're in this much pain every day and there is something wrong. And that conversation, for me, sadly, for 13 months, had to happen over and over and over with healthcare professionals who, I think some believed me, but they had no clue how to help me, what to do, other than take pain medication. And that doesn't work. Or throw you into physical therapy. That doesn't work. Because remember, there are adhesions in your shoulder. As I said, it's like glue that is holding that joint, locking it up so that you can't raise your arm over your head. Okay. For some of us, I could raise it high enough most of the time, if I was lucky, to be able to brush my teeth. Okay. But I couldn't comb my hair. Anything that required me raising my arm and of course my shoulder along with it, any higher than, as I said, being able to get a toothbrush in my mouth. So, this is, I've learned, a malady that happens to a lot of women in their, early 50s. And I think a lot of women are getting misdiagnosed. They're undiagnosed. They're like me, desperate to find answers. And unfortunately, this particular condition falls into a bucket that I call women's health issues that are under-researched. There's not a lot of research on this. In fact, there are some men who get frozen shoulder as well. It's usually linked to an injury or something like that, okay? Whereas in women, ding, 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 it's different. Sometimes it can be linked to an injury or a surgery, something like that. But for a lot of us, we never had an injury. All of a sudden, our shoulder just stopped working, okay? It is hormone related, and we need more people to recognize this condition, understand what it is, what it's not, but especially how it presents itself in women, so that other women don't spend 13 months trying to get a diagnosis and being treated for other conditions that they don't have. So that's kind of a synopsis of what I went through. But let me emphasize, 2.5 years of not being able to fully use my arm, being in constant pain, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. My husband reminded me recently, he said, I can't even count the number of times you woke up in the morning crying. You just woke up in tears because the pain was so bad. And it doesn't matter what you are doing, whether you're standing, sitting, lying down, driving a car, it never goes away. And I think I'm hoping that this message gets to a lot of women in our country who perhaps have been quietly suffering with this condition, and that they can find someone that can get them some support. And I can tell you, the person who figured it out, I'll give two people credit. I had a fantastic chiropractor. He was a friend of the family, practices in New York City. My husband reached out to him desperate. We were at about the 12-month point, and said, you got to help my wife. She's in so much pain. Can you help us? He put together a diagnostic team, and we went from the DC area where we lived to New York City. And believe it or not, one of those diagnostic specialists had seen other people like me. She knew because she had seen other people. She had treated other people like me. That's what it took to get a diagnosis. The next person who helped put the puzzle pieces together in their entirety was a menopause specialist. She was not familiar either with frozen shoulder, but she took the time when I stepped into her office and told her what was going on. She took an interest in and took the time to research it. And she found some obscure, very obscure studies out of Harvard that were related to hormone replacement therapy. And kind of the byproduct of that was it helped relieve frozen shoulder in women. So she immediately started me on bioidentical hormones. Quick aside on that, they're expensive. They're not approved by the FDA. They worked. So you can draw your own conclusions there. So I'm very fortunate that I was able to go down that path. And I have seen tremendous results from that. But again, the FDA, they actually had special hearings on this about 2 years ago, and decided there was not enough evidence. Despite all the women who testified at that hearing, they decided there was not enough evidence to approve bioidentical hormones so that they would be covered by insurance. So we're still fighting an uphill battle, Sarah.
I'm really sorry that you had to go through all that, first and foremost. Like it's heart-wrenching to hear that you had to suffer like that for so long. And the fact that there was not enough education in, medical communities where they didn't know or, hadn't heard of the condition. And I understand too, like with rare conditions, maybe not every doctor is going to know about it. And that's somewhat understandable, but if you're seeing specialists, they should know about these rare scenarios just in case, just as they would know about the common scenarios. And then as far as the FDA goes, actually, maybe I shouldn't say it. My face says it all. But as far as the FDA goes and the FDA hearing, I'm surprised because you would expect them to want to approve treatments that are helpful and work. Or was, I don't like, that's something that I don't understand.
Well, keep in mind too, this is not your grandmother's hormone replacement therapy. Okay. This is much more modern. It is very different. It is I'm not a doctor, but I will tell you that is thought to be much lower risk for women in their 50s and beyond. So, you're right. That is the fact that we can't even get an approved treatment. And of course, that hearing was not about frozen shoulder. It was about bioidentical hormones in general. And I can attest to the in general part that not only did they relieve my frozen shoulder over time, but they certainly helped to eliminate some of the other menopause-related symptoms I was suffering as well, which were also severe. We didn't know. It took 13 months to figure out that my shoulder was a piece of that puzzle. Okay. So this is a much larger issue. I will tell you, as helpless as our healthcare system seems to be on this issue, Chinese medicine has known about this for about 1,000 years. And they actually have a name for it. It's called the 50 year. So why we're so far behind, I'm not sure. Maybe we need to consult Chinese medicine once in a while for a few answers, because Western medicine has fallen behind on this issue. And I fear, Sarah, that there are millions of women who, again, suffering in silence, not realizing that their shoulder pain, this searing pain, and the loss of the use of their arm is not their fault. It is something that's happened to them because of a very natural part of life called menopause, right? So again, I hope if there are women out there who think they might have this condition, that they seek support from a menopause specialist, and maybe a few healthcare providers will have their eyes opened to something perhaps that they're not familiar with.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing that again. And then I wanted to ask you, how can you recognize gender bias in healthcare?
That's a good question. Sometimes it's so subtle, right? It's so subtle. A lot of the time it revolves around pain. When providers don't believe you, when doctors don't believe you, when you say, I'm in pain, something's wrong, right? What that should be to a provider is a cue that, okay, wait a minute, I need to listen to this woman because she's telling me that I don't know what's causing it, but it's not hysteria. There's something behind that pain. When a woman says I'm in pain or something's wrong, doctors need to listen carefully, because I will say this: you and I know that women tolerate a lot. We hide our medical problems and our challenges. If something hurts, it doesn't matter. We still have to go on with life, right? There are people that depend on us. So when we actually are at the point where we're sitting in front of a doctor or a nurse and we're saying, something's wrong, I'm not feeling right, I'm in pain, we have gone well beyond a serious point, right? We've probably been dealing with it for months, if not years, before we even sit in front of a medical professional. So the message here is, listen. We need more listening. I promised today that I would share a story with your listeners. 2 years ago, I lost a very dear friend of mine. Her name was Tracy. Tracy was an African-American woman who tried to get medical care. She said many of the same things that I just indicated. She was in pain. She knew something was wrong. She had medical problems in the past, and with one of her breasts, and she'd actually had surgery many years ago. And no one believed her. Sarah, no one believed her when she told them that she knew something was wrong. A lot of people didn't believe her. And these would be doctors in the state of Maryland, by the way. And by the time somebody did, and she got the imaging that she needed, and she got the results, she was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer, stage 4. And at that point, I'll never forget the day she called me to tell me this. At that point, she had a 10-centimeter tumor on her chest wall that had eaten through one of her ribs. So, I was in shock listening to her relate this story. And 8 months later, she was gone. And I miss her every day. And I want your listeners to understand that this goes far beyond just, this isn't about a woman with a hangnail, okay? There are women who are losing their lives because medical professionals aren't listening. So I hope that gives your viewers something to really think about today.
Yeah, and it's heart-wrenching that I got that far. It really is. As soon as someone says, hey, something's not right, doctors and healthcare professionals should be listening. And I agree with that 100%. And I wanted to ask you also, I know we talked about gender bias in healthcare. Is there racial bias and economic bias in healthcare as well?
Absolutely, hands down. And I think because she was an African-American woman, she had, a double bias, unfortunately, against her. And, this cost her life. And I tell her story because this doesn't need to happen to any other women, right? And before she passed, we talked about this, and it's one of the reasons I have recently gone back to graduate school, and I'm getting a master's in public health. I'm working hard on that, and partly in her honor, and also my mom, who was a nurse. We have a long way to go, and when it comes to women's health in this country and around the world. And I think it starts with the simple act of listening.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And I want to ask too, what steps can you take if you feel like there may be in any bias in healthcare? I mean, gender, of course, but racial, economic bias, because those happen every day too. What steps should you take if you're needing care and you're on that end of it? And also the flip side, how can we prevent it?
That's a great question. And I often say, when it comes to yourself, you need to be persistent. If you know that what you're hearing isn't right, or you're being dismissed, and something is wrong, you have to be persistent. You have to have people around you who can help advocate for you. All right. Your friends, your family, your colleagues, those important people around you that can help stand up with you and help you get the healthcare that you need, or the diagnosis that you need, whatever it is. It's all about advocacy. And it's tough because, my time, 2.5 years with frozen shoulder, right? I was in so much pain. I didn't feel like advocating for myself. I felt like giving up because it was too much to beg and plead for help, for medical care, for something that I didn't understand, right? In that much pain. So, that's where my husband came into play, right? So you have to surround yourself with people who, and talk to them about this, on this topic. People don't think about this, Sarah, every day, right? They don't think about this until they need medical care, right? And then all of a sudden, they don't have that sort of community around them to help advocate for them. And that's unfortunately what it takes. That's what it takes. And you wonder, how do we change hearts and minds on this issue in the healthcare ecosystem? I don't have a good answer for that, but I will say it's got to start in medical school, nursing school, where we have differential gender-based medical education in medical school, right? I think we can train the next generation of healthcare professionals to be much more aware, much more able to ask the right questions, and actually see when a woman is presenting with something that they don't recognize, but that is their cue to start digging deeper, right? Just to understand the differences in conditions that women have. And by the way, women, I think we are, I want to say 70% of the autoimmune diseases are in women, right? So we have this kind of double-edged sword where our healthcare professionals aren't trained. We have research that is woefully behind when it comes to, okay, this is a woman's condition. We need to put more research dollars into figuring out the what, the why, the how, so that we can then turn around and teach it in our medical schools. So we have a lot of catching up to do, but awareness is key. And again, talking to other people around you about this issue and making sure you have, again, your family, your friends, your colleagues helping to advocate for you is a must.
Thank you for that. And I agree with you. I think talking about any healthcare issue with friends, family, etc., is so important, and even publicly, like we do here, because the thing is every time you hear about it, it reduces the stigma behind it. And there shouldn't be stigma behind medical conditions or mental health conditions. There's absolutely no reason why this day and age there's a stigma behind anything medical or mental health. Most of that stuff we have no control over. um you know what I mean? I would say almost all of that stuff we have no control over. Accidents is one thing, but like, as far as our body and what it does, and if there's buildup of things in our shoulder, that's not our fault, and it's not a shame on you for being sick. We need to stop, and I think that's a huge place, because that opens up so many conversations and opens up health for so many people and advocacy and everything like that. And I thank you so much for appreciating that. I want to switch gears a little bit and have you talk about your podcast.
Oh, I'm excited about my podcast, Sarah. Thanks for that. I started down this road because of the dear friend that I lost, and others who've shared their stories with me over the years. And that turned earlier this year into my podcast. It's called Us Versus Them: Patients and Caregivers Confront Healthcare. It is purposefully provocative in many ways. My guests come and pour their hearts out about everything from gender bias in healthcare, like we're talking about today, to I have some wonderful caregiving dads talking about the needs of their special needs children who are moving from pediatric care to adult care. We talk about frontotemporal dementia, FTD. A lot of people don't know what that is. Well, I've got some expert caregivers who have direct experience with that, talking about it, what it is, what it's not, and how they have dealt with it in their families. So a lot of very frank conversations. There's nothing off limits, no holds barred. So I hope that our listeners appreciate real stories from real people, because I think in order to transform healthcare, we need to talk less about statistics and more about putting names and faces to these issues, because that essentially is what makes them real for people. So that's what we do at Us Versus Them. We're trying to take on a lot of issues that folks just don't want to talk about or don't talk about enough, and really have very, very frank conversations.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I heard you had an amazing editor for that podcast also.
I do have an amazing editor. Sarah's husband, Jeremy, has done a fabulous job of getting my podcast beautifully well-rounded and edited and ready for my listeners. So yes.
So thank you so much. He loves doing it. He loves editing podcasts and stuff like that. And he loves yours. And as he's editing it, he's like, babe, you gotta listen to this. Like, this is good stuff, So he's just really good with that. And thank you so much for talking about your podcast and for talking about these issues with us, especially the gender bias in healthcare, because it's so important and it's just not talked about enough. It's not recognized. I didn't even know I experienced it till we started talking. And I remembered, having my kiddo and being told by a doctor, no, a doctor I'd never seen before, mind you, no, we're not doing it this way. We're doing it my way. And I'm like, no, that's not what I signed up for. So again, thank you so much for coming on. Is there anything else you wanted to share with my audience?
Just sort of something that I didn't mention earlier in our conversation. We've talked a lot today about some challenges that women face with menopause. And that word has been in our society forever, sort of a dirty word, right? That's the M word. People whisper about the M word. We need to get rid of that. I think I will speak for Generation X and say that we're going to talk about this. This is not something that we're going to sweep under the rug anymore. It has very real consequences in women's lives. It sets us up, not in a good way, for things like osteoporosis, cardiovascular issues, Alzheimer's disease, also now linked to this sudden drop in hormones that we all face. If we live to be 50 and beyond, every woman's going to face it. So we need more research in this area as well, modern menopause research, and we need women to talk about this, talk about it. It's not a dirty word. We need to talk about it with our husbands, first and foremost, right? And they need to be aware that this is a women's health issue. This isn't something to whisper about. It is something to be open and vocal about for women in my age group and all women, actually. So again, I hope your listeners will take that and take it to heart and start talking about some of these issues in their ecosystems.
Awesome. And I want to thank you for that. And I actually do want to applaud, as a millennial, I want to applaud Gen X for their discussions on menopause and also their discussions on periods, because that was a stigma. You know what I mean? That was also stigmatized in a bad word and something nobody wanted to talk about. And if they weren't what they should be, if they were abnormal, you had no idea. You just knew that you could not, and it was more than just get out of gym class. You know what I mean? It was more than just a free card to get out of gym. It was like literally suffering. And you had no idea about that stuff until I think your generation was the first generation to really put it in the forefront as like, hey, this is a topic. So keep up the good work, and I promise for my generation that we'll follow suit with keeping these conversations alive, unstigmatized, and just healthy conversations about women's medical care, because it's so damn important. And I want to ask you my second to last question. What is your favorite form of self-care?
That's an easy one. So I live in the great state of Colorado now, and the great outdoors is the best form of self-care ever. My husband and I spend a lot of time, when we have it, hiking and snowshoeing and skiing and just enjoying Mother Nature. And that has been, for me, for many, many years, sort of the best self-care, best effective self-care I could possibly do. So I hope others find that to be true as well. And if you're not an outdoors person, today is a great day to start.
Yeah. No, I don't disagree that I think being outside is great. And if, you live in a city or something like that and you're not near, a woods, mountain, beach, whatever outdoorsy activity you prefer, there's city parks that have trees. You can go touch a tree, touch some grass, take your shoes off for a minute. There's all kinds of outdoor and outdoor-esque places you can get to regardless of where you live. So I love that self-care tip. In my final question, where can my audience find you for more information?
They can find me at the Whole Care Network. As far as my podcast is concerned, you can also find me on LinkedIn and Twitter as well, at MaryAnne Sterling. And on Twitter, I'm actually at Sterling HIT. So they can find me there, and always happy to start a conversation and hopefully change the world.
Awesome. Thank you so much, MaryAnne, again, for being here. It means a lot to me that you took time from your busy schedule to talk to me and talk about this super important topic. I want to ask my audience that if you like this episode, that you share, and subscribe to our podcast. If you'd like to support our podcast, you can do so at Buy Me a Coffee. We have the link in our show notes. And also, the best way to really support our podcast is to share it with a friend. If you know a friend who has been affected by any of these issues or is a woman, if you have a friend who's a woman, share it with them. All of your women friends should hear this, regardless of age, because this is such an important topic. Anyway, with that, I will see you next week.